Let's face it, Canada changed everything this season and maybe beyond. Norris is clinging to the edge of McLaren leadership, and Piastri's already built the ladder up said cliff, and when it comes to ladders, I know a thing or two. For fans dreaming of Norris's fairy tale title with McLaren, Canada was a cold dose of reality. The balance of power has shifted, and 2025 may well belong to Oscar Piastri. As of writing, unlike previous McLaren rivalries, the fallout from the incident though, in which both drivers made contact down the Montreal straight, has been kept on a tight leash. It may offer some opportunities that potentially come 2026 when everything changes, everything is reset, and then Lando and Oscar can go again, and there might be an opportunity for Lando to take back control of said narrative, but the prognosis for this year is not looking kindly toward the British driver. However, right now, both men have made amends publicly, and the management has actually kept itself rather resolute. We all thought it was going to be an absolute nuclear disaster from all corners regarding the McLaren team, but no, everything's actually been quite, reserved. And it's also a weird situation that McLaren are painting that everything is absolutely fine and something like this will never happen again, because we all know that's just a barefaced lie. It's going to happen again. I even predicted at the start of this year this would happen at least twice, because you've only got to look at what's happened at Monza, not only last year, but the year before that. For context, the incident 2 years ago wasn't for the win or even a podium, it was for points in the bottom half of the top 10. Very low stakes, but still a very interesting moment in terms of the dynamic between Lando and Oscar. And this is turn 1 at Monza, before they widened it up a bit last year. And for anyone that's done open lobbies within sim racing, you know what exactly could easily have ensued. But the damage had been done when it came to the upper management of McLaren. It was met with incredibly, surprisingly brute force from the likes of Andrea Stella, so here it is for your consideration, and we will be comparing to what happened in Canada. There should never, ever be contact between two McLaren cars. That aged well. There was contact, which doesn't fit the way we go racing at McLaren. You just review things, like you do with anything that is technical or the rational racing. What is important is to have clear parameter as to what you can deem acceptable, and what you deem unacceptable. It's not an emotional thing, it's just like you deal with other things, you deal with racing in a similar way. And this is very clear that for any driver, there's something bigger than them. It's the team. I need to review. I'm sure even the drivers will calibrate themselves for us in that situation. Now, to be fair, later on in that same interview, he did go on to ultimately single out the likes of Oscar Piastri for having misjudged exiting out of the pits on cold tyres. Lando had had the undercut one lap previously, his tyres were up to temperature, so therefore the onus was on Oscar just to maybe not get in the way. But the opening statement was quite clear. Neither driver is bigger than the team. Andrea's Ferrari past shows. No one's bigger than Ferrari, not Schumacher, not Raikkonen, not Alonso. That's the ethos he's doubling down on at McLaren. But yeah, let's just fast forward to Montreal 2025, and the language has definitely changed. It's a lot more softly. So here we are. In terms of outcome, for the first time this season, we scored points with only one car. Lando, after a strong recovery in the race, was in fact involved in an accident while challenging Oscar, which put him out of the race. This resulted in contact between the two cars due to a misjudgment by Lando. The team appreciated that Lando immediately took responsibility for a situation which has cost him important points in the championship. We will now regroup, take our time to review a few things, and make sure we come back stronger, and continue what has been an extremely positive season so far. Now, on paper, the same core instruction has been telegraphed in both passages, that neither McLaren car should really be hitting each other, as it will compromise one or both. But the language has changed, and what he chose to emphasise, Stella, reveals how the team and the two drivers have evolved. In Monza 2023, Stella laid down the law. Cold, technical, no emotion. McLaren were midfield, Piastri a rookie, and both drivers were learning the limits. It was a public line in the sand, and a little bit of a wake-up call for Norris in 2023, because it was quite clear from previous races and then going forward, it was not going to be a cakewalk where Lando Norris could reign supreme at McLaren, an invincible force after having trounced Daniel Ricciardo in 2022. Whereas Oscar, he was clearly not going to be a pushover going forward because he would only continue to improve, whereas Ricciardo had stagnated, arguably declined. That ultimately, it was all good. It didn't cause too much harm when it came to the constructors, but nevertheless, there were some positives to be had. There was a major stress test, and neither driver have actually come out of this hating the other, at least publicly. So to ensure that harmony was maintained, putting out fires is critical from all parties. No animosity can be conveyed whatsoever. And it worked. Norris apologised on camera and on team radio within seconds. Stella and Brown thanked the likes of Norris for his humility and accepting of the situation, offered him full support still. And in the case of Oscar Piastri, whose race was put in jeopardy somewhat because he had to come in for fresh tyres to save potentially a puncture, and he did actually get some damage to his rear diffuser, he was also not blaming Norris at all, saying it was unfortunate for the team at large, and at the first opportunity. Both he and Lando shook hands, were in an embrace, and it looked like, water under the bridge. It was all good, absolutely fine between the two of them. It made it look like happy family, that this wasn't going to be a disciplinary hearing. It was more about just making most of what they had, damage limitation, that maybe Canada wasn't going to be that great, and hey-ho, them's the breaks, let's just move on to Austria. Now, that's all very well and good for the team, but what does this mean for the drivers, though? Well, I mean, for starters, Oscar Piastri just shows how far he has come in only his third season of competition. Because back in Monza, when he ultimately did make that misjudgment that Stella is now blaming Lando for, he was actually in that moment where he was riding a high, that he had managed to survive the first half of the season where McLaren were a bunch of no-hopers before Austria and Silverstone, and then he managed to taste a little bit of front-running success after battling with the likes of Max Verstappen in the Spa sprint. That was a very notable example. And then coming into that, there was this moment where he just had to learn the school of hard knocks when it comes to team orders and team management. Whereas now, Piastri is not even mentioned in this situation, which shows that there is an implicit element of trust amongst the organisation when it comes to the likes of the Australian. There is an element of seniority being lent to the Australian, that at the very least, he is a co-leader of the team. And for Lando, 2 years ago, even then, he was being treated the same way as his teammate, whereas now, it's him being the one that is singled out, instead of Piastri being singled out, but understandably so, for him being a tempestuous rookie. Yeah, that is a major turnaround that I don't think many expected. People would have been understanding if it were Oscar still making more of the mistakes than the more senior Norris, but no, it's gone the other way around. It therefore signals slightly higher expectations from the likes of Norris, but at the very least, it is showing that the team has not yet abandoned him, and they trust him well enough to be able to conduct himself admirably and respectfully without the need of any heavy-handed discipline. Because, well, we didn't see that, because the comparison between this and 2 years ago, it's evident. These two drivers are very, very mature, and the team does trust them to not fly off the handle and make McLaren look dysfunctional, and provide Christian Horner very valuable ammunition at a time when he needs it most to clap back at Zak Brown. Amidst this, Piastri's ascent to co-leader status at minimum is confirmed, and Norris's mistake is being framed by McLaren as a momentary lapse rather than a breach of trust. So for the team's point of view, they have managed the situation in a way which should hopefully portray this version of McLaren as nothing like the Ron Dennis era. Sure, like that time in the team's history, the team came first, but back then, the drivers were treated more like commodities. Commodities to provide the team prestige and to appease the sponsors. Under the watch of Stella and Brown, we see more onus toward the driver and their personalities and allowing them to flourish in their own way. That they are vital cogs in the McLaren machine, that they are held on a pedestal with much higher regard. So yeah, they are very important to the way McLaren functions and conducts himself amongst social media and the fans and Formula One itself, but therefore, like cogs within a machine, they have very much their well-defined place. And it's best for them to stick at it instead of moving somewhere else or trying to change their size, or else the entire machine falls apart, or it grinds to a halt. Even though the tone from Stella has softened a little bit, that he does trust both drivers to some extent, that they have matured, there is something subtle going on in the background, and we are noticing some sort of minimal shift headed away from the likes of Norris and more towards Piastri. I've talked about this before in previous videos, but I think it is gaining a little bit more pace as we go through the season. The team hasn't given up on Lando per se. There is time for him to redeem himself, and next year it could all be reset from zero and they go again. But in terms of this year, it does show that maybe their trust in Lando to convert has been shaken at least a little bit. In public, McLaren sounds rather forgiving toward Lando, appreciative even. that both their young guns are towing the line set for them. Be that as it may, most likely within the team in private, Canada have reset the internal ledger. One driver just dented the constructors' lead of 374 to 199 over Mercedes and damaged his own title chances. As I think is quite obvious, the 28-point swing back to Toto's team has meant McLaren no longer lead by double the tally of the second-placed operation. Now, it may seem like overkill to some. What does it matter? McLaren are still leading the constructors. What's the point of a few points that means they don't have twice the amount of second place? Well, it's all about prestige in the eyes of Zak Brown. The way he's been able to turn around the team from where they were at the end of 2016 when he first arrived in the job. To be able to emulate the success and the domination of the McLaren glory years between 1988 and 1991 would be a triumph. It would be the ultimate badge of honour to be able to say that under his watch, Zak was able to repeat what the likes of Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger were able to do and get back-to-back constructors' victories. It's all about the team. Stella has said it's all about the team. The priorities and wants and needs of the drivers are very much second priority. But it doesn't really matter who wins the title, just so long as they play nice and don't disrupt the constructors' plan. And very much so, Mercedes did just that. Albeit very, very small and minuscule. But as we saw with Red Bull, who were dominating the constructors, McLaren and, to an extent, Ferrari were able to turn it around. So McLaren aren't resting on their laurels or anything. They don't want anything jeopardizing that constructor's defense campaign. So therefore, maybe in the short term, to ensure that they remain dominant and that there is no fight back from either Red Bull, Ferrari, or Mercedes, Norris might have to play second fiddle for a little bit, that he may not be given the most optimal strategy calls. He may be more directly told to leave room should he actually come across Oscar Piastri on his travels around the race again, that he's not allowed to battle. He may be told explicitly to hold position. That is until Lando can actually prove categorically that he is faster, the telemetry proves it, and Stella is convinced that it might be worth letting him through. There has to be more that Lando has to do to convince the bods on the pit wall to follow his hymn sheet. That is until at the very least the summer break, where they can regroup, reassess, and then go forward into the second half of the season. Because Stella has hinted that whilst neither driver is angry, serious discussions are to be scheduled before Austria, despite papaya rules being tested to the extreme, and ultimately failing. But okay, one mistake, fine. Both Lando and Oscar are only human. But a second mistake? Those things I said just now could easily be something that the management could use to cover themselves, imposing team orders. The psychological weight is heavier than the point swing too. That the triple header that had just gone had been a really, really good one for the likes of Lando, where he had been able to get a little bit closer to Piastri in the championship going into Canada, but then it all fell apart again. And Norris did admit on camera that what he did was stupid. He took full responsibility for it. And then repeated that apology in every single media interview he conducted throughout the rest of the day. I do respect Lando for owning the situation, that he had ultimately made a bad call, that he had the momentum coming out of the final chicane, and he could have either gone left or right. He went left, there wasn't a gap, and then bye-bye. This public demonstration of humility will serve him well when it comes to internal meetings, comes to the wider world, the perception, how we interpret the situation, myself as a content creator, and the press. But then again, he doesn't really care what people think. He's said that multiple times in recent weeks. What he cares about the most is team harmony and that the team still back him. He's not talking to us, he's talking to his bosses. So yeah, within the British tabloids, we are hearing about tough conversations and reviewing the rules of engagement, so we might see an amended papaya rules or the scrapping of them entirely. We'll have to just wait and see for that one. But when we go to Australia, oh, the tone is completely different. I mean, what did you expect? We all talk about British bias, but Aussie bias is still pretty potent. The Australian arm of Fox Sports went further, arguing that Norris has nowhere left to hide because the error feeds a narrative that pressure from his teammate unsettles him at critical moments. That narrative could linger within the overall sphere of influence of F1 until Lando wins again, demonstrating a clear drubbing of not only Max Verstappen, but also Oscar Piastri. So as you can probably tell, Norris has got a lot of homework that he has to convince many representatives from all corners of Formula One to just say that he is still McLaren's guy. So you can imagine that's a lot of mental load and a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. In stark contrast, Piastri's side of the fence can use all of this for their own advantage, to great effect, to quietly convince McLaren that he is their guy. Get on with the job of winning the constructors, back to back. To just get on with the act of racing, to not be distracted with other ventures outside of the sport, and all the while not asking for handouts, but asking for parity still. That we've seen this time and time again from Oscar himself, that so long as he has the same equipment and opportunities as Lando, everything's hunky-dory with him. And Mark Webber has probably been keeping a very beady eye on the management to ensure that it stays that way, that Piastri's not asking for any favours here. If he gets the favours from McLaren, then that's on them for choosing Oscar over Lando. But at the moment, Piastri, all he wants is just to have the same opportunities that are afforded to the more senior driver. Besides, I don't think Zach or Andrea wants to really go toe-to-toe with the might that is Aussie grit. And it might also explain why we see more of Adam Norris, Lando's father, knocking around, that he has actually been a very regular mainstay in terms of the cameras and the world feed, just to have that sort of presence that really backs Lando 100%. But anyway, back to the incident itself, and I think it's quite safe to say that amongst many different circles, not just the Australian ones, that Piastri came out of this on top, even though he wasn't on the top 3 steps of the roster at the Canadian Grand Prix. And honestly, he didn't look close because he got mugged by Kimi. I'm not ashamed to admit that. But in the midst of it, he was cool-headed, no radio drama, focused on salvaging 4th. Even off the podium, he extended his lead, earning big points for the engineers. Naturally, I can imagine Oscar was quite angry, but he kept that to himself. And I think that's actually quite a wise thing to do, because Ferrari have borne the brunt of public radio spats that have been reinterpreted and projected via the world feed and the whims of the F1 TV producers. The Racers headlines said it all. Piastri's rattled Norris. And with a fresh multi-year deal and equal pay, Oscar's a co-leader now at minimum, whether Lando likes it or not. In F1, cash still talks. And even though Stella has stated that upgrades will be available to both drivers at the same time until it becomes very numerically obvious that there is a favourite, and by the way, as Oscar stated, and I must make this very, very clear, even though Oscar and Lando had different parts, it was mainly down to the fact Piastri refused the brand new front suspension, sticking to something that he already knew. And also, and I don't think I've really heard many people talking about this, that in the wake of that crash, I think it may have provided a little bit more evidence that maybe McLaren's safest way to do the double, which is the drivers and constructors, is maybe with the Australian. It was a fair amount of damage considering that this was a self-inflicted injury, because not only was the front wing trashed, a brand new front wing for the Canadian Grand Prix, I think Lando bolted it on for the race itself, but it was certainly knocking around in practice. Then there was also the brand new front suspension. The left side of it absolutely totaled. That would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage, and also an important part, now no longer having a complementary one with the right side. It would have also damaged slightly the diffuser of Piastri to boot, so he would need a brand new repaired floor. And as we saw with Yuki Tsunoda's smash in Imola, it resulted in him no longer receiving technical parity with Max for a good few races. Yeah, McLaren are in much healthier position championship-wise, but they are showing no signs of slowing down development. Their lack of form in Montreal may be justification in not slowing down, so Norris's actions surely haven't gone down well with the engineers. And the data doesn't lie as well. Norris had the DRS run in slipstream, but didn't go around the outside. That gives Oscar's camp ammo for safer strategies, first pick calls, or even early dibs on upgrades should that result come, especially with Mercedes and Max closing in fast. Even if McLaren choose to maintain parity when it comes to parts until the absolute mathematical bitter end, I do think that Piastri's camp will take what happened in Canada as some sort of ammunition to maybe sort of convince the pit wall that maybe papaya rules isn't the way to go, and that if both men do come across one another and they are fighting for position, and there is clearly no big delta difference in terms of tyre management, that maybe Oscar's camp, Mark Webber, could convince the likes of Zach and Stella that any future confrontation between the two of them could compromise their constructors' efforts. Maybe tilting decisions on the day-to-day in favour of the Australian without any formal orders being given, just changing the mindset, albeit day by day. And you hear this in comments from Oscar as well, that, yeah, he's not pinning the blame on Lando. He's overall saying that, oh, you know, what happened? It wasn't ideal for me, but it was a shame for the team. They worked so hard, and we'll look into this really strongly. He is making textbook responses to the media in the way that McLaren wants. He is showing them that's the likes of Zach and Andrea, that he gets it, Oscar, that he understands what's going on, that he's thinking about the team. He is not calling for priority, he is calling for parity. And McLaren ideally wants this for the longest time. They don't want to impose team orders because they don't want to artificially change things because they got two really talented drivers, two high performers. It's just that at the moment when they are put in the same car, in the same circumstances, with Max a little bit further away, so therefore not maximum pressure from the Dutchman, that one is clearly starting to win out just that little bit more. 22 points ahead of Norris, almost, as Martin Brundle would say, having a race win in his pocket, which can easily be a psychological boost in of itself. And even though Lando did defuse the matter himself, he did play his part within the McLaren widget, ultimately, he is the one that caused this flare-up to happen in the first place. It could have easily just been a McLaren 4-5, that if he was thinking of the championship, surely losing 2 points is better than losing 12, especially he started the race looking likely that maybe he was going to be losing 9 points. So you just got to be thinking long-term, which is not what Lando was doing. And that was a real shame because earlier on in the season, he was doing just that when he was leading the championship. He played it safe in Japan, and he was counting his lucky stars in Australia when Oscar had his crash. But let me make this absolutely clear. Lando has not lost full control of the team, that there is an opportunity, as I have said multiple times in this video, for things to be completely reset next year, and he might have a chance to take back control. And also, he's got a long-term contract for the next 2 seasons after this one, so he's not going to be leaving McLaren anytime soon, unless things get really untenable, and that maybe he might be looking elsewhere. And heck, I even saw a couple of rumours that maybe at the end of this year he could even retire, maybe going on to some more business ventures or something. I've only heard rumours of that, so I've got the spanner out for this one, so I'm not entirely sure about that, but I did hear it, just so you know. And also, it wouldn't be wise for McLaren to pick out favourites not even halfway through the season because they need both drivers to be on the song in case Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull make the most of the brand new technical directive and come back swinging, because I'm not hearing now Mercedes talking about giving up on this year and looking to next year. They're now back in the fray with George winning races and Kimi on the podium. So they need McLaren to keep going and both their drivers happy. They can't browbeat him into submission or else it will definitely affect Lando's performance and it will give ammunition to the likes of Christian Horner, who is chomping at the bit to get one over Zach Brown after Zach Brown getting one over Christian Horner multiple times in the last 18 months. Now, the consequence is more about perception from the wider world. For the next few races, maybe all the way through to the summer break, Oscar will enjoy the moral high ground, the championship lead on the cusp of that magical 25 points, and maybe an implicit veto over anything that looks like a repeat of Montreal. He might hear the glorious words of, "Lando has been told to hold position." So Norris now has to answer with absolute cleanliness, with no resentment that will compromise the integrity McLaren wishes to boast, or else the balance of power inside McLaren will continue to drift away toward the Australian side. Whatever way you look at it, Oscar does not come out of the situation the lesser driver. And Lando did not do his case for leadership of this team to be maintained for yet another season any favours. Again, 2026 might offer him a lifeline, but right now he has to really try and win back anything if he wants to try and get a championship at the expense of Max Verstappen, because it's looking increasingly difficult for the Dutchman. But right now, Oscar is doing everything that is expected of him from McLaren, whereas at the Canadian Grand Prix, Norris lost points, prestige, and parts. His humility helped, but the headwinds are very strong at the moment. Piastri's leading both the win head-to-head and the quali head-to-head, and crucially, has not been the subject of major gaffes save for his Australia excursion. But even then, he clawed back some kudos with his fight back to 9th and his overtake on Hamilton in a place where overtakes aren't usually possible. Inside the team, Norris can still just about lean on 3 pillars. First, his raw speed. The telemetry in practice was stronger than Piastri's until the final stint. Second, contrition. Owning the mistakes diffuses any suggestion of attitude problems, something McLaren values after its earlier experience with teammate clashes. Third, contractual weight. Losing both cars in a title fight hurts McLaren more than favouring one over the other, and Stella has said performance, not politics, will decide the championship. Therefore, Norris still has a leg to stand on, but it's an increasingly narrow one. He has to close the gap fast, and he has to get wins over his teammate. Do it softly, slowly but surely. He can't go death or glory or something like that, because he will then continue to lose points. If he can do that, then Montreal was just a temporary blip, and it might make his fight back all the more glorious. If he fails, then all the focus will be on Piastri, because right now, Oscar is proving that he is a driver who is all about focus, no ego, no drama. None of that. This isn't just about points anymore. It's about who McLaren trusts with their future more, and right now, it's Oscar Piastri. He's not distracted by anything else other than racing. And a distraction outside of McLaren? George Russell's future. Aston Martin's sniffing around. To find out why this has suddenly become a thing which isn't actually as daft as you might think, especially if it's at the expense of Lance Stroll, watch this video next, straight after this one.